My friends, sometimes we come face to face with the kind of darkness that doesn't just frighten us, it tempts us. It whispers lies, promising comfort while quietly stealing our peace. I've been there. I've stood in moments where the light felt distant, where the noise of the world tried to drown out the voice of God. But it was in one of those moments that Jesus showed me how to stand against the darkness and how to escape the mark of the beast that this world so easily tries to brand upon our hearts. Before we begin, I want to know something beautiful from you. Where are you watching from right now? Let me know your name and your city in the comments. I love seeing how far God's message travels. And if this story touches your heart, I invite you to subscribe, like, and share this video with someone you love, someone who might need a reminder that God's light is still brighter than the darkest night. It all started during a season of exhaustion, one of those times in life when your soul feels like it's running on empty. I don't mean the kind of tired that a few hours of sleep can fix. I mean that deep spiritual weariness when you wake up and still feel heavy inside, when the prayers you used to say with fire now fall from your lips without strength. I remember that season vividly because everything around me felt louder than God's whisper. The world's noise, the fear, the confusion, the endless chase for comfort and approval seemed to echo in my heart louder than His truth. I would sit alone in the quiet of my room just staring at the cross on my wall, and I'd think, "Sell, Lord, where are you in all this?" There were nights when the darkness felt almost tangible, like a thick fog that refused to lift. I could sense how easily the world was changing, how the lines between truth and lies were blurring, how people were choosing what felt good instead of what was right. It wasn't just happening out there. It was happening inside me, too. Little compromises, small moments where I'd choose silence instead of courage, comfort instead of conviction. And one night, I remember saying out loud, "Jesus, how do I stand when the world is bowing to darkness? How do I stay true when everything around me seems to be falling apart?" I didn't expect an answer. I just needed to let the question breathe in the stillness. But it was in that stillness that something sacred happened, the kind of quiet encounter that changes everything. Not because the room fills with light, but because your heart finally begins to see again. In that moment of silence, I felt a warmth rise in my chest, as if the presence of Christ Himself was drawing near. It wasn't dramatic. There was no thunder, no vision in the sky, but there was peace, deep, anchoring peace. And within that peace, I heard words, not audibly, but in my spirit, clear as daylight, tender yet firm. "Jonathan, the mark of the beast isn't something you wait to avoid in the future. It's something you resist right now." I froze. I didn't fully understand what He meant, but I knew this wasn't about numbers or chips or physical signs. Jesus was speaking about the heart, about allegiance, about where we truly belong. He continued, "It's not about a symbol, it's about surrender. Every time my children trade truth for convenience, every time they let fear dictate their choices instead of faith, that's when they start to wear the world's mark instead of mine." Those words hit me like a wave because I saw myself in them. I realized how often I'd let fear guide my steps. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of being misunderstood. I thought I was standing firm in faith, but in reality, I had been bending quietly, letting the world define what was acceptable, what was comfortable, what was safe. And there, sitting alone, I felt the deep conviction of His love. Not condemnation, but correction. Jesus wasn't shaming me. He was inviting me back. He was showing me that standing against darkness isn't about rebellion for the sake of pride. It's about devotion. It's about clinging to His truth, even when every other voice tells you to let go. That night I opened my Bible and it fell to Ephesians 6, the armor of God. I read the words slowly, tremblings. "Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the W's of the devil." It was as though the passage came alive. Every verse, truth, righteousness, faith, salvation. They weren't abstract ideas anymore. They were lifelines. They were His way of saying, "You are not helpless. You are equipped. You are mine." But let me be honest, it wasn't easy after that. You'd think once Jesus speaks, everything becomes simple. It doesn't. In fact, sometimes when God shows you the truth, that's when the battle truly begins. In the days that followed, temptations felt stronger. The world's pull became sharper. I noticed how many subtle ways darkness tried to creep back in, not as something evil and obvious, but as something comfortable and disguised as normal. It was in conversations where gossip felt harmless, in moments when scrolling through social media turned into envy, in the little compromises where I'd say, "It's not a big deal," but But each time I felt myself slipping, his words echoed again. The mark of the beast begins in the heart that forgets who it belongs to. Saw us one afternoon. I remember walking through a crowded city street. Billboards flashed messages of wealth, pleasure, power, all promising happiness. But when I looked closer, I saw faces, weary, disconnected, lost. It struck me. The world has learned to market its darkness beautifully. It wraps sin in sparkle, calls it freedom, and tells us to chase it. But behind every bright screen, there's a shadow, a hunger that never seems to end. And in that realization, I whispered again, Jesus, how do I stand against all this? The answer came, simple yet powerful. You don't stand alone. He reminded me that faith was never meant to be lived in isolation. That's why he built his church, why he gave us one another to be lights together to strengthen one another when one grows dim. Darkness thrives in isolation, but it retreats in fellowship. So I began seeking community again, small groups, prayer circles, people who were trying just like me to walk in his light. We shared struggles, we confessed weaknesses, we prayed for courage, and in that unity, I began to feel my spirit revive. There was one evening I'll never forget. We were gathered in a dimly lit chapel, candles flickering, worship echoing softly. As I knelt to pray, tears welled up in my eyes. I whispered, Lord, I don't want to be branded by this world anymore. I want to be sealed by you. And in that moment, it felt like heaven leaned close. His presence surrounded me, gentle, holy, unwavering. It wasn't emotion, it was revelation. I could almost hear him say, then let my love be your mark. Let my truth be your identity. The only seal you need is the one written upon your heart by my Spirit, says. That encounter changed everything. From that day on, I stopped trying to fight darkness with anger or fear. I began to fight it with love, with kindness, prayer, forgiveness, and truth. You see, the devil doesn't fear loud religion. He fears quiet obedience. He fears the believer who forgives when they could retaliate, who prays when they could despair, who serves when they could complain. Because that kind of faith, humble, steadfast, and surrendered, reflects Christ himself. Over time, I began to notice how different life felt when I lived that way. The same world that once felt oppressive started to lose its grip. The darkness didn't disappear, but it no longer controlled me. Because when Jesus becomes your light, the shadows can't dictate your steps anymore. There were still trials. Don't get me wrong, there were days I stumbled, days when fear tried to creep back in, whispering, "You're not strong enough." But now I knew where to turn. I knew whose voice to trust. One night I was journaling, reflecting on how far I'd come, and I wrote these words, the mark of the beast is fear, the mark of Christ is faith. And that truth has stayed with me ever since. Standing against darkness doesn't mean living perfectly. It means living, yes, faithfully. It means remembering who you belong to, even when the world tries to make you forget. It means clinging to the cross when every other foundation shakes. Sometimes that stand will cost you something. You might lose people, opportunities, or approval, but you'll gain peace, the kind that can't be taken away. And that peace is worth more than anything the world could ever offer. So when I look back on that season of exhaustion, that place where I felt lost, small, and surrounded by darkness, I don't see weakness anymore. I see grace. I see how Jesus met me there, how he taught me to rise again, not by my own strength, but by his Spirit. Because the truth is, the only way to escape the mark of the beast is to be sealed by the love of the Lamb, to walk daily in his mercy, to choose him even when it's hard, to let his light be the mark upon your soul. And once that happens, once you've encountered that kind of love, the darkness loses its power to define you. You become a living testimony, a walking reflection of the victory of Christ. Even now, I sometimes still hear that gentle reminder in prayer. Off, Jonathan. The battle isn't against flesh and blood. The enemy isn't out there. It's in the lies that try to live in here, bossy. And every time I breathe deep and whisper, Lord Far, strengthen me to stand, not with pride, but with faith. Because at the end of the day, that's what he calls each of us to do. To stand not in our might, but in his mercy. To walk through the valley of shadows with hearts anchored in the one who already conquered death itself. And that, my friends, is how Jesus taught me to stand against the darkness, not by running from it, but by walking with him through it. Because when you walk with the light, even the darkest night cannot overcome you. There came a time even after that revelation when doubt started creeping in again slowly, quietly, like a shadow returning at dusk. You'd think that after hearing the voice of Jesus so clearly, I would never question again. But faith, I've learned, isn't a one-time victory. It's a journey. It's a daily surrender. It's the battle between what we have known in our hearts and what we have feel in our flesh. There were nights I found myself sitting in the same spot where I had first prayed, the same flicker of candlelight, the same Bible opened before me. Yet this time I felt distant from that peace I once knew. The world's noise had grown louder again, and my heart began to tremble under its weight. Everywhere I looked, there was fear in headlines, in people's eyes, in the uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring. And in those moments, I'd whisper, Lord, where are you now? Did I lose your voice? Did I fail you somehow? I can't tell you how many times I wrestled with that silence. It felt as though the warmth that once filled my soul had dimmed. The prayers that once flowed like rivers had turned into deserts. There was a deep ache in my spirit, like something inside me had gone numb. I began to wonder if I had imagined everything, the peace, the encounter, the words I thought I heard. Maybe I was just fooling myself. But even in that despair, a small stubborn part of my heart refused to give up because I remembered. I remembered how he met me before. And I clung to that memory the way a drowning man clings to a lifeline. Still, the doubts kept whispering. What if you can't stand when the real storm hits? What if your faith isn't enough? And that's when Jesus began to teach me something deeper. That renewal doesn't come from being strong. It comes from being surrendered. One night as I sat there struggling, I turned to the story of Peter. I've always loved Peter, not because he was perfect, but because he was real. He was passionate, impulsive, flawed, and deeply loved. He had walked on water. He had promised Jesus his loyalty. And yet when the moment of testing came, Peter denied him 3 times. That story used to make me sad until I realized how much of Peter lives in me, in all of us. We want to stand tall for Jesus. We want to be brave and faithful. But sometimes fear wins for a moment. Sometimes the world's voice grows louder than our faith. And yet Jesus never stopped loving Peter. That realization hit me hard. The Lord doesn't define us by our moments of fear. He defines us by our willingness to reach back for his hand when we fall. Because Peter didn't stay in his failure. He let grace pull him back up. So that night I prayed again, not with confidence, but with humility. I said, Lord, I don't know how to be strong, but I know how to be yours. And maybe that's enough. And that's when peace began to stir again. Not as a sudden flood, but as a gentle whisper of, you will fall, Jonathan. But I will lift you up. You will tremble, but my love will steady you. Those words melted something inside me. I realized then that Jesus was never asking me to be perfect. He was asking me to be present, to keep showing up, to keep trusting even when I couldn't feel him. Faith, I discovered, isn't about the absence of doubt. It's about choosing trust in spite of it. So I began to live differently. Instead of chasing emotional highs or waiting for divine moments, I started finding God in the ordinary. In the sunrise after a sleepless night, in the sound of laughter with a friend, in the quiet strength it took to forgive someone who'd hurt me. Every morning I'd whisper, here I am, Lord. I don't feel holy today. I don't feel brave, but I'm still yours. And slowly that daily surrender began to rebuild something inside me. I remember one afternoon I went for a walk. The sky was heavy with clouds, and everything looked gray. I was thinking about all the chaos in the world, the deception, the fear, the division, and I started to feel small again. What difference could one believer make in a world so dark? And in that quiet moment, the wind picked up and a single beam of light broke through the clouds, touching the ground right in front of me. It was so small but so beautiful, and I heard a gentle voice in my spirit say, ease, even one light can pierce the darkness. I stopped walking. Tears filled my eyes. That single beam reminded me that it was never about how powerful I was. It was about how powerful he is through me. I didn't have to shine like the sun. I just had to stay connected to the source of light. There were other moments too, simple, sacred ones, like when I helped a stranger who had fallen on the sidewalk, or when I called a friend I hadn't spoken to in years and discovered he'd been praying for a sign that God still cared. These weren't grand miracles, but they carried the presence of Jesus. And that's when I truly understood what he meant when he said, you are the light of the world. Light doesn't argue with darkness. It simply shines. But that didn't mean the battle was over. There were still nights when the old fears would whisper again, you'll never be enough. The darkness is too strong. Yet this time I knew what to do. I would close my eyes and whisper his name, Jesus. That single word carried power, peace, presence. It reminded me who I belonged to. One night during prayer, I felt his presence come over me in a way I can't quite describe. Not as a vision or a sound, but as a weightless warmth wrapping around my soul. And I heard again, softly ours, The mark of the beast begins with fear, but the seal of my spirit begins with faith. Trust me, and I will renew you. That word renew stayed in my heart. Renewal isn't a one-time event. It's a rhythm. Just like the tide comes in and out, our faith ebbs and flows, but it always returns when anchored in Christ. So I began to live with a deeper awareness of grace. Whenever I stumbled, instead of hiding in shame, I'd run to him in prayer. Whenever doubt crept in, I'd remind myself that Jesus never once turned away from the brokenhearted. Over time, I noticed something beautiful. The very places where I had once felt weak became the places where God's presence felt strongest. My doubts became doorways to deeper faith. My fears became invitations to trust. One evening while reading Isaiah, I came across the verse, "Huff, those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles." So I read it again and again until it sank deep into my soul. Renewal doesn't come from rushing. It comes from resting in him. There's something so freeing about realizing that you don't have to hold the whole world together. That's God's job. Ours is simply to hold on to him. And that's what began to happen inside me. The chaos of the world didn't disappear, but the chaos within me began to quiet down. Because when your faith matures, peace doesn't depend on circumstances anymore. It flows from trust. I started to smile more, to pray with gratitude, not just requests, to see every challenge as a chance to depend on him a little more. And when people would ask, "How do you stay so calm with everything happening?" I just say, "Because I know who holds tomorrow." That's renewal. Not the absence of storms, but the presence of Christ in the storm. There was one final moment in that season that sealed this truth for me. I was sitting by the ocean one morning, watching the waves crash and retreat over and over again. I thought about how relentless the sea was, never stopping, never surrendering, no matter how many times it broke on the shore. And I heard that still small voice say, "That's what faith looks like. It keeps coming back. Even when it's knocked down, it returns again and again, because it knows who set the tide." I closed my eyes, let the sound of the waves wash over me, and whispered, "Thank you, Jesus, for never giving up on me, even when I nearly gave up on you." In that moment, I understood renewal. It wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about remembering who I already am, in him loved, chosen, sealed, and strengthened. And so every time doubt tries to visit again, and it does, I just smile and say, "You can knock, but you can't stay because I know who lives here now." The truth is, we all face moments of weakness. We all fall short. But Jesus doesn't measure us by our failures. He measures us by our willingness to return. He is the shepherd who leaves the 99 to find the one, even if that one has wandered 100 times before. And that's what gives me peace today. Not that I become perfect, but that I am perfectly loved. Not that I never doubt, but that even in doubt, he remains faithful. Every sunrise, every quiet prayer, every breath is a new beginning, another chance to be renewed in his love. And when I think about it, that's the miracle of grace. No matter how many times we stumble, Jesus is always waiting to walk beside us again. That's the beauty of renewal. Not that we rise once, but that we keep rising hand in hand with the one who never lets us fall too far. There comes a point in every believer's journey when you realize that faith was never meant to be kept within the walls of your heart. It was meant to overflow. When Jesus renews you, he doesn't simply restore your peace so that you can sit comfortably in it. He fills you so that you can pour that same love into the world. And that realization changes everything. I remember one morning after prayer, sitting in quiet reflection, feeling God's presence so tenderly, I asked him, "Lord, what do you want me to do with this renewed faith? What's next?" And the answer came gently, serve. It wasn't loud or grand. It wasn't about stages or crowds. It was about the quiet, consistent choice to love people, to see them, to help them, to walk beside them. Jesus reminded me that true strength isn't shown in power, but in compassion. It's not found in being honored, but in humbling yourself to lift others. That word, "I serve," stayed with me. It echoed through my thoughts all week. I began to notice opportunities I had overlooked before. A neighbor who seemed lonely, a friend who was quietly struggling, a stranger who just needed someone to listen. I started realizing how many hearts around me were aching, waiting for someone to care enough to pause. So I began small. I visited a local shelter one evening, unsure of what to expect. The air was filled with the scent of soup and the sound of quiet chatter. People sat at long tables, some weary, some smiling, some just lost in thought. I walked in feeling unworthy. What could I possibly say or do that mattered here? But as I started talking to people, I realized that sometimes the greatest gift you can give isn't wisdom or wealth, it's presence. There was one man sitting alone by the corner. He had a tired face, eyes that carried stories too heavy for words. I sat beside him, offered a simple, "Hey, how's your evening going?" He looked at me for a moment and then said, "It's better now that someone asked." That moment hit me so deeply. I realized how rare it is for people to feel seen, truly seen. We talked for a while. He told me about losing his family, his home, his hope. I didn't have the answers. I didn't have a sermon prepared.